In this video, you'll learn to create a curtain panel family to model the finishing double layer typical for timber stud walls. Shall we?
Okay, now to create the finishing layers for the stud walls, we'll need to create a curtain panel. If you remember, the curtain panel is what fills these empty spaces between the mullions. In the previous videos, we downloaded an empty panel so nothing would appear there. However, in standard architectural curtain walls, these panels are usually made of glass. If I select the panel and unpin it, you can see I can switch it to glazed or solid panels. But none of those are what we need. And so let's create our own custom panel family. Go to the File menu and select New Family. Then choose either Metric or Imperial Curtain, Wall Panel, and click Open. Now jump into the exterior view and create an extrusion. Use the rectangle tool and place it slightly outside the outer reference planes. The reason for this offset is because the curtain panels use these reference planes as the edges of the mullions. So the timber sheets need to overlap and cover the stud elements. You'll understand it much better once the model is finished. So for now, just keep that in mind. Now let's create align dimensions from the rectangle to each reference plane. Since we made all the top chords noggins and bottom chords 35mm wide, the top and bottom offset needs to be half of that, which is 17.5mm. So I'll assign 17.5mm to these dimensions and lock them. However, the side offset can change depending on the stud width of the wall. So let's create a parameter called offset. Just like we did with the stud walls earlier, let's create different timber sheet types for each wall thickness. However, since the wall depth is not relevant yet, I'll simply name them XX by 35mm, which will use a 17.5mm offset, and XX by 45mm, which will use a 22.5mm offset. Click OK, and while I'm here, I'm also going to reduce these dimensions a bit so the panel behaves more like a realistic curtain wall panel size. Remember, this family represents only one single panel of the curtain wall. So if I sketch some lines schematically to represent the noggin, it would sit somewhere around here. And the curtain panel would be covering all this area. Imagine another panel placed directly above this one. They would end up matching perfectly edge to edge. And the same thing happens with the mullions or studs. This panel covers half of the stud, while the adjacent panel covers the other half. I'm also going to clean up these names so they follow the same naming pattern. Now, before loading the family, make sure to delete these lines if you created them. They were only schematic lines for explanation. Now, because the timber sheets are actually double sheets, let's jump into the left view and create two reference planes. These two lines will represent the wall depth. So let's create a parameter for that as well and make the planes equidistant. Actually, now that the wall depth became relevant, let's create separate types. For each wall depth, 70mm walls will use a 35mm value, while 90mm walls will use 45mm. All right, now let's move this side of the timber sheet to the reference plane and lock it so it follows that plane. Then create an aligned dimension from the reference plane to the opposite face of the extrusion. Adjust it slightly and create a new parameter called plate thickness. If I type a fixed value directly into the formula, all the types become identical, so instead I'll just assign 8mm to the types. Now let's mirror the timber sheet using the second reference plane so I can align and lock both sides the same way. However, this new extrusion does not inherit the same parameters from the original extrusion we copied. So in this view, select the first extrusion, switch back to the exterior view, and temporarily hide it. Now we're left only with the new extrusion. If I double click it to edit it, you can see the dimensions didn't copy over. So we just need to recreate them. Finally, let's create a parameter to assign materials to the sheets. Now save the family as stud wall panels and load it into the project. Select one wall. This one is the 70 by 35 stud wall, so click Edit Type and change its curtain panel to the one we just created. And there we go. Now we have the timber sheet finishing on the walls. But let's assign a material to it. Select any panel and go to Edit Type. Under Material, select the same timber material we've been using for the studs and trusses, then click OK. Yeah, that looks much better. Now it actually feels like real timber. Now let's repeat the same for the 90 by 45 stud wall. If you want, you can also modify visibility and graphics and give the curtain panels a little transparency so you can still see the studs behind them. But remember, we are still under a temporarily modified view. So once we're done, we can simply deactivate the temporary view and return to the original view template. Now I'm going to edit the view template and turn off the color filters so we can see everything using the natural timber appearance instead.
In the final video, let's create a waffle slab for footing to complete the timber-framed house. See you in the next one.